Hello, and welcome back to the Garden of Grace devotion. My name is Pastor Katie, and I'm one of the pastors at Trinity Lutheran Church in Lilburn, Georgia. Today, I want to revisit the theme that I offered on Sunday, which had to do with forgiveness, with forgiving others the way that God has forgiven us. It was rooted in a passage from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verses 21 to 35. Where one of the disciples, Peter, goes to Jesus and he asks him a question. He says, "If another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Jesus said to him, "Not 7 times, but I tell you 77 times." Now that's a big number. And then Jesus tells a story. He tells a story to try to help Peter and the disciples understand. He tells a story about a king who wants to settle accounts with his servants. So he calls in a servant who owes him an astronomical amount of money. The servant says he doesn't have the money, and the king forgives him the debt in its entirety. As the servant is leaving the king, he runs into somebody who owes him about $100, and he has no mercy. The gentleman says, I don't have the money. Have mercy on me, and I will pay it." And the man says, no, I am going to put you in prison until you can pay me back what you owe me. Then the king finds out. He finds out that this man that he showed such great mercy to was not able to forgive somebody else even a small amount of debt. And he calls him back in and he's angry. And he winds up sending the gentleman to prison until he can pay his debt. The point of the story is that the man didn't realize that in response to all that he had been forgiven for, he didn't owe the king anything. He was, however, supposed to show mercy to others. And so it is in our lives as children of God. Every day of my life, God has forgiven me for something, I'm sure. Every day. I imagine greater amounts during different periods of my life. God has forgiven me for a great deal. My response to that is not to owe God, but to offer mercy in response to others. Last Sunday, and as I talked about this in the sermon, I shared sort of a lighthearted story about my frustration with a gentleman who was driving up and down my street with a dumpster. I talked about how I was trying to record a sermon on forgiveness, and I was getting more and more resentful towards this person that was making noise. And it was a rather lighthearted story, but today I want to share with you in the Garden of Grace devotion that there have been times when I have deeply struggled with forgiveness. One time in particular, about 6 years ago, someone that I loved dearly was taken advantage of financially. Someone stole from her. And there was even some physical harm caused. And I was very, very angry. I was responsible for helping to make sure that this older person that I loved so had what they needed and were taken care of. And someone else took advantage of them and caused them some harm. I was so angry at the time, it was hard for me to even think about the person who did this. And I had a great deal of resentment. And I did not feel merciful. As I journeyed with the situation over time, as I processed my feelings of anger and resentment, I began to try to pray for her. But I couldn't even pray directly for her at first. I started by praying for her children. And then I started imagining this person who caused this harm as a child themselves at some point. And eventually, through God's grace, I was able to pray for the person. At the very same time that I was praying for this person, I was also pursuing legal action for there needs to be accountability so that this kind of thing doesn't happen to another person and another person and another person. I believe that God calls me to forgive this woman that caused this harm. At the same time, I believe it was also important for there to be earthly consequences for the behavior that was done that will also hopefully protect others from being harmed in a similar way. Forgiveness is hard sometimes, really, really hard. And when I think about this person that caused harm, I still feel angry sometimes. And I still feel some resentment sometimes. And I wonder if that is part of why Jesus said 77 times we needed to forgive, because maybe that's how many times it takes me to actually do it. I don't know. What I know, though, is when I focus on this person that caused harm, it's very hard for me to lean into grace and forgiveness. However, when I shift my focus to God and all that God has forgiven me for, I am much more able to offer mercy and forgiveness and to let go of the resentment to this person who caused harm to someone I dearly love. At the end of the day, forgiveness is not really about me and that person. At the end of the day, forgiveness is about me turning that resentment over to God and trusting in the one who leads and guides us every day. It's a hard topic. And I didn't want you to think that because of the lighthearted story I shared on Sunday that it isn't something that I wrestle with, because I do. I do. My prayer is that God will continue to help me to forgive, even those things which seem unforgivable. And when I look at God's grace, I find a much easier time doing that. It is something, though, I have to revisit every time those same feelings come up. It's important for me to revisit forgiveness. Forgiveness to others in response to all that God has given me, all the forgiveness that God has given me. May God journey with us in the easy things and the hard ones. Thanks be to God whose mercy is new, always. I pray God's peace to you. Amen.